I would be interested in talking about church history stuff. To which I'm like, do I have to go back to like the biblical days? Because I don't know too much about it. He said, no, just stick to America, which I do know because I'm a history person who does American history. And so today I'll be talking about Colonial Times. Talking about Colonial Times, early church history, history of Christianity in the United States. History of Christianity in the United States. Today I'm mainly focusing on the 17th century. For normal people, that's the 1600s. We're talking about 1600s, very early American stuff. Very early American stuff. Now, anybody happen to know when the first colony was in America? I know what state it was in even. Virginia, yes indeed, Jamestown. Oh, now it's not working? Oh, it was working earlier. Technical difficulties, my clicker was working. Let's see if I can get closer.
You got it.
I know, it was working earlier. It was working perfectly earlier. Sorry, live stream. This is real life.
Carol, go back there and fix it. Do you need a clicker? There you go. Ta-da.
Oh, yeah, now it's working. All right, cool. All right, so 1607, Jamestown is established. In 1607, the British come to America and establish a colony known as Jamestown, known for good King James of England. Among their number was a chaplain. Because they thought they needed a chaplain. If you're going to the New World, you need a chaplain. His name was Robert Hunt. Robert Hunt is the first pastor in America for the English. I know there are other colonies. We don't care. We're the United States. We only care about England. Keep it to yourself, France and Spain. So, his name was Robert Hunt. Less than a year after coming to America, he was dead. Less than a year after coming to America, he was dead, along with pretty much everyone else at Jamestown. The first year of Jamestown was really bad. Now, about 63 years later, in 1670, a pastor by the name of the Reverend Samuel Danford, who had been educated at Harvard, gave a sermon for the opening of the Massachusetts legislature. This sermon was called Aired into the Wilderness, and we actually have a copy of it. It's called Aired into the Wilderness, where he talks to the legislatures who are beginning their legislation about the deep roots that America has with God. The deep roots that America has with a covenant with God. As I said, he is Harvard trained. The sermon itself is very obtuse. I'm not going to read selections to you because that would put you to sleep even more than you already are going to be going to sleep. It requires an extensive knowledge of Greek and Latin. It requires you to know the Bible very well. This is not an instructive sermon. This is not like, hey, we're going to teach you the Bible. You're getting stuff reaffirmed here. You better already know this stuff. Absolutely. Now, these two groups, okay, if you want to talk about early American thought, you're really talking about the Massachusetts Bay Colony, New England, and you're talking about Virginia. Those kind of form the basis of what would later become the United States. And for the sake of today, I have a little pun we could go for today. We're talking about the difference between prophets and prophets. Prophets with a PH, prophets with an F. Are we concerned about making money? Are we spreading that good news? Absolutely. So that is what we're talking about today, the prophets and the prophets. So when you're talking about early American Christianity, you're really talking early on about the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church is the Church of England. As I said before, America, English colony, Church of England, had been established about 70 years before the first forays into America. A little bit of British history, just very, very brief. Henry VIII wanted a divorce. Pope wouldn't let him get a divorce. He's like, too bad, I'm going to start my own church. And he starts his own church. Now, the Anglican Church, the Church of England, like I said, had been around for about 70 years. And there we go. It's been around for about 70 years. That's long enough to be kind of established, but not deeply set. 70 years ago is the mid-50s for us, which is, that's fairly old. However, some of y'all probably have memories of the 50s, and so you're like, that's not old at all. Be quiet, you young pup. Yes, I understand that's the case. Now, the Church of England does keep a lot of Catholic ideas. It does keep a lot of Catholic ideas. A lot of the liturgy is very Catholic. Yeah, they're putting things into English, but the way that they're structured is very similar to the Catholic Church. You have the Archbishop of Canterbury instead of the Pope. Now, even though they keep some Catholic ideas, some people believe that they are keeping too many Catholic ideas. Most notably, the Puritans. The Puritans, or a name you might know, they are very interested in having a quote-unquote more pure church. They think that Catholicism has tainted the church irrevocably, and we need to strip away all the Catholicism from the church so we can have a more pure, representative of God religion. Now, these Puritans, they are definitely persecuted in England. Nobody likes the idea that your church is bad, and the idea that the church in England, this has become very important for the rest of today, is very much tied to the government. There is no separation of church and state in this time period. Still to this day, the head of the Church of England is the king, or queen. So right now, King Charles is technically the head of the Church of England, the Anglican Church, technically even the Episcopalian Church, which is American. Because they are not just dissenting against religion, but also the crown, they are often persecuted. They're often thrown into jail for because of that. Also, times Puritans upset people because they are seen as annoying. Most famously, they do things like outlaw dice, and they outlaw Shakespeare for a while. They literally even canceled Christmas. I'm not even joking. They canceled Christmas because they thought it was not religious enough. They thought everybody does on Christmas. They're not really celebrating Jesus. They're just going around getting drunk and eating geese. So you know what? We're just going to outlaw Christmas for a while. Kind of your pious, holy roller, frozen chosen type. Now, in America, the Anglican Church is not all that interested in converting anybody. They are not really converted people whatsoever. Their main interest is the well-being of the colonists, well-being of the people who are there. Getting Native Americans converted, that'd be great, but they're not really trying to do anything. They're not translating anything to the Native American language, not really making any forays to it. Now, what are they really concerned with? Well, there's the other elephant in the room, mortality. Mortality is very high in the colonies. Very, very high. Everybody died. I mean, yes, everybody still dies to this day, but the mortality rate was incredibly high. So if you're dealing in a place where everybody's dying left and right, you want to make sure everybody's kind of cool with God at any given time. Does that make sense? Especially when they don't understand things like germs and disease. It's just like, wow, people are dying left and right. It's you might have heard the old adage, there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. You ever know that? Like in a foxhole, in warfare, there's no atheist, because if you have bullets flying over you, you're going to be praying to the dealer quite a bit. I'd say the same applies to the early colonial days. Like, everybody's dying. You got to have somebody who's taking care of your spirit. So much of Jamestown is just survival. So much of Jamestown was survival. The first year, I think like 85% of the people died. There are credible reports of cannibalism during that first winter. Very, very bad stuff. So yeah, if everybody's dying, you need to make sure you're good with the good Lord. So on a practical level, what does religion look like in Jamestown? Here we go. Number 1, go to church. Number 2, try not to die. Number 3, when somebody inevitably dies, get them buried. Call the priest. Number 4, when the priest inevitably dies, call England for another priest. That's pretty much what it was. I should mention, to be a pastor in the New World in the Anglican Church, it is an appointment. It is not something you chose. It is something basically assigned to you by the church. There are no bishops in America. There are no bishops who are deciding, hey, let's need a pastor here. So if somebody does die, you got to send a messenger to England saying, hey, pastor died. And he's going to be like, cool, we'll send another one. That could take, the sea voyage was usually about 3 months. So you're talking at least 6 months before you get a new pastor. And by the way, people are still dying. So yeah, not that great. So what do they preach on? What do they preach on? We don't know. We don't know. They do not keep records of what they preached. The content. Now we do know kind of when they are preaching, because the successor to Robert Hunt was a man by the name of Richard Buck. Richard Buck we know quite a bit about because he is he's there for like 30 years. He actually lasts for about 30 years. And basically, we know what his charge is. Basically, we see his papers that he got from the Church of England. What are you supposed to do in the New World? You're number 1, lead prayers twice a day. Twice a day, he's to lead prayers, probably something from the English Common Book of Prayer. So basically, read some prayers. And then, here's what's fun. You preach 2 times a week. And I bet if I gave you $20, you could never guess what days of the week they are.
Sunday and Wednesday.
No, Thursday and Saturday. Thursday and Saturday, you are supposed to preach. Absolutely. We do know that people thought he was a good preacher. John Rolfe, who was very important for Jamestown, later married Pocahontas, was the guy who brought tobacco to Jamestown. He is on record saying, well, that Richard Buck, he's a good preacher. But he doesn't say what he brought back. He just said, good preacher. Doesn't really feel the need to say what is anything. The only thing we really have about him is a phrase that was used in one of his sermons, quote, the great work at this plantation. basically says, hey, we are here in Jamestown and we are doing great work on this plantation, because make no mistake, this is a money-making enterprise, all right? They are not establishing colonies for the good of humanity and, ooh, we're gonna bring this up here. Jamestown is to make money. Richard Buck and also Robert Hunt, they were not paid by the company. They were expected to pay their own expenses. They were expected to have their own land, have their own household, have their own slaves, have their own servants, basically be a bivocational ministry. If we can use modern day language, they are not getting any money from anybody. You need to make a lot of money. That's the thing. Everything needs to be making money. By the time we get to 1619, when the Pilgrims come to Plymouth Rock, Jamestown is kind of making some money, but not much. Tobacco is going to come later, and that's what really makes it susceptible. All right, let's get to the one you probably knew about. A little bit. Yeah, here's the conversion of Pocahontas. This is a little bit more complicated because you probably heard the Disney fairy tale, which is Disney and it's all made up. When John Smith was actually with Pocahontas, she was about 6 years old. There was no romantic tension between them. Later on, she does get, this doesn't make English look very good, but we're not them. She gets held hostage by the English for a while, and basically to exchange for some Native Americans prisoners. They do a prisoner swap, however, they don't let Pocahontas go. 2 years later, she claims that she got converted, and she has changed her name to Rebecca. And then now she has married John Rolfe, who is about 12 years her senior when they get married. About a year or two after that, she goes to England. In England, she actually meets up with John Smith again. They're like, and then she dies again. So it's kind of sad that is her Pocahontas story. Let's get to the Puritans. They are a very divisive group. No way to put it about this. They are a very divisive group. People hated the Puritans. Unless you were a Puritan. Then you thought this was the greatest thing ever. If you're to define them negatively, they want to remove everything that is Roman Catholic out of the Church of England. They want to get rid of anything Roman Catholic, anything even remotely Catholic. If you're to define them positively, they want to finish the Reformation. You know, Luther had a good start, and Calvin did some other stuff, and now finally we can culminate into a pure church that is going to be great for everybody. So what do they believe? What do they believe? And this is where we get into the theology. And I might turn to some of y'all for some of these terms, maybe you know them. Who knows? So a big one they believe in is total depravity of man. Total depravity. Anybody heard that one before? I'm saying nods, but not words. Okay. You've heard the phrase, can't define it. That's okay. This is often tied to Calvinism. It's the idea that everybody's a sinner. Everybody's a sinner, and people cannot do anything to change that. Like, man can do nothing. Man is so awful. By man, I mean humankind. Mankind is so awful that you can't do anything to get salvation. It's all God. It is all God. It's predestination is kind of the phrase that gets thrown out about. Anybody heard that one before? Hey, y'all are quiet, but I get it's church. Talking back. We're not Pentecostals. We don't just shout. I get it. So, sorry, any Pentecostals might be on the screen. So, they believe that basically God does everything. God does everything. Man can do nothing. You need to really get this in your head because it's going to be the way of America for quite a while. For here as Baptists, we generally believe, hey, you can pray a prayer, walk down, get baptized, and God's free grace is available to everybody. Not that good. They believe basically God chose you, and if He didn't, there ain't nothing you can do about it. That's the way. In addition, they really believe in the Bible. And you're like, well, yeah, of course, that sounds right. They're a Christian. They should believe in the Bible. No, they super believe in the Bible. They are sola scriptura. They believe the Bible is central to everything. They believe that Christians should only do what is explicitly stated in the Bible. And I bet you're wondering, well, Stuart, that sounds pretty straightforward. I mean, why else are we in church? Hold on. They believe that only things that are said in the Bible are things you could do. So for instance, can you drink Powerade? Is Powerade mentioned in the Bible? You can't drink Powerade. Now Luther, who they kind of came from, believed Christians should only do the stuff that is not said in the Bible. Does that make sense? So basically, if the Bible says, don't do it, don't do it. But if the Bible doesn't say anything about it, you can probably do it. Like drinking Powerade. Does that kind of make sense? Like, murder, okay, yeah, we know we definitely shouldn't murder. But, should we go dancing? Should we play dice? Should we go to a play? Those are things that the Puritans are like, well, no, it says nothing about that in the Bible. You should not do that. Luther is like, it's not breaking any commandments, so yeah, go for it. Go nuts. They believe that the Bible wants them to meet in a congregation. There's another big thing about them. They are congregationalists. Oftentimes, the American Puritans are known as congregationalists because I cannot iterate this strongly enough. They believe in the collective whole. They do not believe that God really talks to individuals that often. They believe that God makes covenants. I cannot iterate how big that is for them. They believe that God makes covenants, and they only talk to the collective group. So as Christians, we need to be meeting all the time and basically getting good instruction. Because the big one, they believe that society is a unified whole. They do not have a difference between the personal and the private life. None whatsoever. They basically, the way that you behave in public is the way that you behave in private, and vice versa. They have no concept of private life, or, hey, they're like this way in public and another way in private. It doesn't matter. So what does that mean on a practical level? If you believe society is a unified whole, and there is no disconnect between personal and private, you better be acting the right way 24/7. That's what they believe. They believe basically you have to be behaving the exact right way 24/7. Now, does that seem very negative? Could it be viewed as very cold and hard-handed? Absolutely. However, if you twist it a little bit, and I'm going to twist it a little bit for you, could you also see how that could be viewed as compatible with democracy? Think about democracy. Majority rule, right? We got to make sure that everybody's voting the right way. We got to make sure that, even a small person can mess us up because we want to have the majority in line with us. That makes sense. The idea that the individual is kind of empowered. Take that in opposition to like the Catholics or something. It was like, oh, no. It goes to the Pope and the Cardinals and the bishops or whatever. I suppose this was saying everybody's equal. Everybody's equal, and we all have the same onus upon us to act the exact same way. Because one person messing it up can mess it up for everybody. You can see how that could be viewed kind of positively, but I don't think you would want to live in that type of environment. But then again, some of you are from Albany, and you're like, no, that sounds like Albany. No, just kidding. Get it. They believe that God enters into covenants. I mentioned this earlier. This is a very big thing for them. They believe in covenants. Very strong. They don't believe that God acts outside of covenants. They look at the Bible, they're like, look, in Genesis, God made a covenant with Abraham. The Abraham covenant, I will be your God, you shall be my people, you'll have more descendants than the sand in the desert, that sort of thing. They're like, if you look at the Bible, God doesn't do anything outside of covenants. God is not going to just talk to one person and say, hey, one person, I want you to do this. It's always to a collective body. The church, Israel, that sort of thing. Let's see. And also, they believe that God is never going to do anything outside of the covenant. They don't believe God can break a covenant. Man can break a covenant, bad things going to happen, but God can never break a covenant. So basically, if a covenant breaks, that is man's fault. That is human beings' fault. They don't believe God will never break a covenant. We'll get into that later. We'll skip that one. So they do leave to the New World when it becomes very obvious that England does not like them. Once it becomes very likely they're going to go. They debate whether or not they should go to the New World. Cromwell, who I'm not even going to get into, he has a debate. Those who go over, not all of them are super devout. I need you to understand that. Not everybody's super devout, but the leadership is. So everybody who goes over is at least cool with having super devout leadership. Does that make sense? So I will never say that everybody who came over on the Mayflower was like pious, good-hearted, whatever. But leadership might have been. And those who came along were okay with that type of leadership. Talk about some settlements. Jamestown said before. Yeah, we're not going to go for this. Let's just skip through this one really quickly. Plymouth, once they do get to Plymouth, you have the Mayflower Compact, which is basically an agreement they sign on the boat that says, hey, here's how we're all going to live. And it's really iterating this idea that there is no disconnect between the personal and the private. Everybody is a part of this. One person can mess it up for everybody. If one person is not in line, they are going to do that. Their first several years are tough. The first governor, William Bradford, he lasts for a while. He dies very early on, though, so it doesn't last too long. So by the time we get to 1630, where we're going to pivot for a little bit, Plymouth only has 300 people. The first Thanksgiving they have was, I don't know, a couple dozen people at most. By the time we get to 1630, there are only about 300 people. So not a very large colony. But it's profitable enough. It is never super profitable, unlike Jamestown, which becomes very wealthy very quick. Plymouth is never super profitable, but it's profitable enough. Also, it always has a fairly high number of women. something kind of interesting that most other colonies are very male-centric. Plymouth actually has about equal numbers between men and women. And if you look at the colonies, those who tend to last the longest tend to have women in them. We can get into it, but I'll just say women are more capable. How about that? Let's just say that. And yes, everybody's nodding, and yes, and that's how we're being happily married. Yes, women are much more capable. So, if there are not that many of them, why do we have the plays? Why do we celebrate Thanksgiving? Why, if there's only 300 of these pilgrims in 1630, whenever more people are coming to the colonies, why do we have so much about them? Make sense? Why do we grow up putting on the buckle shoes every November and doing those little plays for Thanksgiving? Well, let me get into that. One reason is that there's a lot of dominant personalities in New England. A lot of dominant personalities of New England, which is basically the Puritan colonies turned into. They take a lot of notes and they write a lot of books. They write a lot of books because they write a lot of books. We can read them, and it basically influences later thoughts. They're also way more involved in the government. In Virginia, they don't really have separation of church and state, but in the New England colonies, there is no separation of church and state whatsoever. If you're a leader of the church, you have to be a leader of the, if you're a leader of the government, you have to be a leader of the church. For the longest time, voting in New England was based upon church membership. You could not vote, doesn't matter how rich you are, doesn't matter how anything, unless you're a member of a church. And being a member of a church is actually kind of hard at this time period. It is not just like walk down the aisle, sign a little card. Oh no, there's a little bit more to it, a lot more to it. And also because they are so involved in government, they're taking a lot of records, so we also have records of that. In addition, Boston becomes a very important early education center, not just for religion, but also for everybody else. Boston has the first college in the United States by about 60 years. The difference between the first college in Boston and the first college in New England versus the first college in the South. There's about a 60-year gap. There's about a 60-year gap between the first college in Boston and the first college in Virginia. We'll get into those in just a little bit. They become very dominant. They're particularly dominant the Puritan way in 4 colonies, all of which are pretty important. Plymouth, which we talked about. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, which later becomes Massachusetts. Plymouth is way more Puritan than the Massachusetts Bay Colony is. However, Massachusetts Bay ultimately absorbs Plymouth and becomes the modern state of Massachusetts. So, technically they're 2 different colonies. Another one, actually the most strict Puritan one, is New Haven. Anybody know where New Haven is? Maybe you know the big college in New Haven? Connecticut, yes, New Haven, Connecticut. That is where Yale is located. New Haven is actually the most strict form of Puritanism. They were the most strict of it at the time period. They later get absorbed into this final colony of Connecticut. Connecticut is another colony. It's formed in 1636 by the Reverend Thomas Hooker, who takes settlers from Massachusetts near Hartford, and then New Haven was absorbed by the Connecticut colony in 1662. So basically you have 4 colonies that become 2 states that are super Puritan. Harvard's located in Massachusetts, Yale's located in Connecticut. They are the 2 big education centers, not just for religious training, but also for all education in the United States. And so to this day, those are very, very powerful colleges that have a big influence on things. Massachusetts is probably the most standard one, though. If you talk about what is this like, most states would follow the Massachusetts model. Big emphasis upon church membership, full church membership. Okay, only church members could vote, and you have to be the right kind of church member. To be the right kind of church member, you have to act right. If you don't come to church, you can lose your membership. If you lose your membership, you lose your right to vote. Not only that, you have to have a certain wealth standard. We'll get into that a little bit later, but they believe basically there's a direct line between being wealthy and being moral. They basically, God is going to bless the chosen, basically the elect. Those that God has selected beforehand to go to heaven, God is going to bless, and one of those ways is going to be financial. So if everything's going well for you financially, God's probably blessing you, because remember, they're living in the death zone. So if you're surviving, well, God must clearly like you, because everybody else is dying, ergo, you're probably one of the elect. But if all of a sudden your crops start failing, or people start dying, ooh, maybe you're not part of the elect. So you might lose your church membership. Also, if anybody here on like the finance committee, anybody on finance? Okay, well here's a way to raise some money. They required pew rental fees. I'm not even joking. You had to pay to rent your pew every year. You paid for the seat, and basically it was a rental fee for the year, and if you didn't have it, you might lose your membership. And already I see the finance people are like, okay, hold on here, we can make it a deficit. We can charge a little bit with there. Not too much. I want to say it's the equivalent of a couple $100 a year in modern day money if you adjust for inflation, but yeah, still, I see some gears turning right now.
That's
All
when they
right.
complain if somebody was sitting in their seat.
Yeah, that's where the whole complaining from sitting in your seat because you didn't pay for it. I know here's just seniority, you're just like, we've been in the seat for 50, 60 years, whatever. But yeah, like bring your receipts to church. You're like, here's my W-2s and deduction right there. Pay for this seat, absolutely. Also kind of interesting compared to other colonies, particularly Virginia, women get a lot more rights in Massachusetts. If you're a woman in the New World, you want to be in a New England colony because you get a lot more rights. They do not get full citizenship. They do not get the right to vote. However, they do get education and stuff, and they are also expected to go to church. If your wife did not go to church regularly, you could lose your membership if you're a man. So, yeah, go figure. Now, if the wife comes without her husband, well, you definitely just lost your membership if you're a man, if that ever happens. A good example of this is, Role of Women, cool. John Winthrop is a pretty good example of this. He's a very early governor of Massachusetts. He's governor for about 30, 40 years. For most of early Massachusetts, he is the governor. Under his rule, church membership grows, as well as the colony size. Colony and church membership grow together. He looks like he's pretty successful for that. And what's really interesting is even though they're supposed to be Anglican, they break away very quickly. Theoretically, the Puritans are supposed to be Anglican because this is an English colony. However, what it turns into is, as long as they're making money, don't make us mess with y'all. Don't make us mess with y'all. Whatever's working is working, so we will not demand our tithes and stuff. That's going to become an issue later on. Because it was so profitable, because it seemed so effective, because people seem to be happier, people are living longer, you have a higher amount of women, which means more people have families, and that tends to make the settlers happier, the male settlers happier if they have a family. They don't want to mess with what works. Make sense? They don't want to mess with what works. If, hey, if people are happy, yeah, they're supposed to be Anglican, but you know what? They're making money. And at the end of the day, they want to make some money. They want to make some money. Under Winthrop, the Cambridge Platform was enacted in 1648. Basically, it says what role the government should play in what it should look like and what is the role the church can sit in. Basically, it's the first time in America we have this is what the government should look like. And the church is very central. The church is very, very central. Very clear that the colony is Christian. They're truly pushing this is a Christian colony with a church having ultimate say in everything. Great example. They said that magistrates, who are the early predecessors to judges, should go to pastors on their decisions. Basically, they said the judge needs to go to the pastor and say, hey, how can this decision help further the cause of the church? Interesting. Very interesting. In fact, basically the pastor has the ultimate say in the church. Because you want to have this is what I find kind of interesting, they put a huge emphasis on education. Probably more than anywhere else in the world, the Puritans are putting a huge emphasis on education for everybody. For everybody. I think I mentioned the first college in America comes in 1638 when a young minister by the name of John Harvard, seen here being John Harvard, leaves a library of 400 books. He leaves a library of 400 books. 2 years earlier, the Massachusetts legislature had said, we want to establish a college for training preachers. They're tired of sending over for England to get new preachers. They said, you know what? We need some here. We need some local boys. We don't have to wait 6 months for another preacher to come in. Let's start educating them there. Books are expensive and hard to come by. John Harvard happens to have 400 books lying around. He says, hey, you get my 400 books. We're going to start the library for Harvard. They named the school after it. This is the first college in the United States. And still to this day, the divinity school at Harvard is a very big organization. For the longest time, Harvard was pretty much just training ministers. It's relatively past 100, 200 years that they've gotten into training non-ministers. But still to this day, Harvard does have a divinity school. So does Yale. The first college in Virginia was William and Mary, which comes about in 1693. So like I said, almost 70 years gap. Almost a 70-year gap between New England and Massachusetts. However, my favorite thing to talk about, though, is public education. The Puritans were the first to really push universal public education for everybody in their place. Not just wealthy. Not just wealthy. Everybody should be doing that. In 1642, they passed a law that says basically, a town would be fined if all children were not taught how to read, understand religion, and the legal system. Once again, 1642. They're saying all children. Did I say male or female children? All children. Not only that, they passed one of my favorite bills ever named 5 years after that. The Old Deluder Satan Bill. Yes, that is not a typo. They were kind of loose with language back then with how things were spelled. Basically it said, hey, we all know, and it says it in the language, it says we all know that Satan is the old deluder. He'll lie to you. So basically we need to make sure that everybody is educated. If you're a town of over 50 people, you have to not just have a school, but also pay for said school. You are responsible for raising your own taxes and paying a schoolmaster to have a school. Now, is it a very long education? No, they generally stop around 7th, 8th grade in modern day. So basically, but you're really a very literate population, from top to bottom. Ironically, this actually makes the Puritan colonies one of the most literate places in the world in the 1650s. Everybody is able to read, and we have evidence of this. Even women are allowed to read. I'm not trying to be sexist, but it's the 1650s. Women are expected to be able to read, know the Bible, know the law, and write to each other. We have more letters and coins from women in New England than like anywhere else in the world. I'm not even exaggerating. Anywhere else in the world, because from top to bottom, not just wealthy women, but poor women, middle class women, servant women, midwives, they're all writing, and they're all writing excessively, mainly because of these bills. There's a direct line from these type of bills to public education now in the United States. Now, I'm not saying they're the exact same thing now. I know some of us are in public schools. I know some of you have very strong opinions on public schools. I'm just saying, originally, it was very tied to religion. Now, what you teach nowadays, we're not talking about that. This is history, not modern class. Now, the heart of the early New England life is the worship gathering. This is what it's all about, the gathering. The meeting house is the most important and biggest building in all the New England village. It's the church. Anybody ever been to New England? Anybody seen some of those old little towns? Church is always the biggest one. It's always in the center of town, maybe right by the courthouse, right in the town square. The church is going to be there. It is a meeting house. It's not just a church. It's also called a civic center of sorts. You would have gatherings, weddings, things like that there. Even in Europe in this time period, the idea of having a church wedding is not super common. Generally, you would do a wedding on the church steps. You would not go inside said church. You would do it unless you're very, very fancy. So what would they do in these services? Well, we actually know this one. We actually know what they do in the services. First thing they would do is they would sing the psalms. They would sing the psalms. That might sound kind of familiar. Hey, do we sing at this church sometimes? Yeah, that's not rhetorical. Yes, we do sing in this church sometimes. Singing the psalms. Now, the way they sing the psalms is not the way you think they might sing the psalms. It kind of starts out as chanting. For the longest time, the Puritans have a kind of a taboo against music. They're like, ooh, we should not have like instruments. Or singing might be kind of suspect, because remember, does it explicitly say in the Bible that you can use modern instruments? Does it have guitars and drums? Well, it has drums. But does it have electric guitars in the Bible? So do you see they're kind of iffy about it. So initially they're just kind of, you can't really sing, you just got to kind of like chant the psalm. So like, it's a little bit more than recitation. Like, it's not just like the Lord is my shepherd, shall not want. It's just basically like kind of singy, kind of not singy. That does soften in time. That does soften in time. In time, they are having more music, more actual singing. Still kind of iffy on instruments, which if you look at any church, you could talk to them about what instruments they allow in worship, and that gets very contentious. Woo! Oh, I see some veterans of the church worship wars in here, yes. But the big focus of a New England church service, which is actually kind of unique for the time period, might be kind of commonplace for us, was the sermon. The sermon. This is kind of a contrast to like early Catholic services, which are more about the rites. Your Eucharist, your communion, your things like that. Yeah, you might have a homily, but probably not. The Puritans are really pushing emphasis on the sermon, which is basically kind of like our modern day sermon, the instructive, dense sermon that basically you're going to talk about the Bible and these sort of things. So there are two types of sermons. Number one, you got regular sermons. All right, judging solely upon the name, how often might you hear a regular sermon? Most of the time, you're going to hear a regular sermon. They are typically preached twice on Sundays. You're like, hold on there, Kelly, what? Yes, there are 2 sermons on Sundays. Oh, don't worry, it's about to get worse. Do
they have them back to back, or is it a break?
There's usually a break in between. About an hour or two. We're going to get to that in a second, though. An occasional sermon, then, would be preached with? Yeah, holidays, feast days, first meeting of the legislature, air in the wilderness, what we talked about earlier, that was an occasional sermon. Those are called out throughout the year. Most of the published sermons we have are occasional sermons. They generally don't feel the need to publish a regular sermon that often. Most of the sermons that we have from this time period are the occasional sermons because they think it's a special thing. They think it's a special thing. They're not full on, okay, whatever. What's the word I'm looking for? You know how like sometimes in Catholicism they have like a liturgy kind of like planned?
Right.
It's like, hey, you know, every church is going to be talking about this one. The regular sermons are not quite like that, but they're more routine than that. Don't worry, it's about to get worse, because we're not talking about the actual contents of the sermon. What's kind of interesting, though, is if we look at the occasional sermons, and also the subject matter of some of the regular sermons that we do have, they don't change much. In about 150 years, from like 1630, where we have our first published sermons, to the dawn of the Revolution, the content does not change very much. The type of things that they're talking about does not change very much. The language used, the metaphors, well, they don't use metaphors. They do not change very much. Compare that to modern day, where if you go like 10 years, church is like wildly different. You're like wildly different. So what are some themes of some of these sermons? What are themes of some of these sermons? A couple themes. Do I have it? No, I don't. Okay, cool. The central theme is, number one, the Bible is the only an acceptable source of sermon themes and examples. Meaning, you don't get anything not from the Bible. To which you're saying, all right, Kelly, that doesn't sound too bad. You shouldn't be talking about non-Bible stuff in church. Think about every sermon you've ever heard if you're Protestant. Think about Pastor Josh. I'll throw him not under the bus. But might he start out with like a joke, or like something going on in the news, or like maybe a story from his own life that might illustrate a broader theme? Well, that will not fly in these circles. Everything's got to come straight from the Bible. If it's not from the Bible, you can't even talk about it. So you get very dense sermons that get into the Greek and Latin. Don't worry, it's about to get worse. Another big theme, all have sinned. All have sinned and need salvation. God only provides salvation through his mercy. You cannot do anything for it. And basically, a saved sinner must serve God by following the law. They do not believe in once saved, always saved. You never know your own salvation. So maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But you have to pretty much follow the law for the rest of your life. As a human being, there's really nothing much you can do other than follow the law. Nothing about like, hey, try to convert other people, or establish a hospital, or feed the hungry. Nope. Just try to follow the law. Be really pushed upon yourself. The idea of grace doesn't come around that much in the occasional sermons. Sometimes in the regular sermons, but not all that often. Not all that often. There is definitely in the occasional sermons more emphasis on the covenant, the idea that there is a continuation between God and the individual and the overall part, like we talked about earlier, which is this whole idea about the continuity between those ideas. The sermon is a dominant form of communication of New England this time period. Pretty much everything we have in New England this time period is probably a sermon. I'm not saying there's non-sermon published materials out there. There is almanacs, letters, but there are not like novels back then. They're not really publishing biblical commentary, really. It's just basically a straight sermon. Also, there's really no newspapers. A lot of times what we know about the news in these places is what they talk about in the sermon, even though they're not supposed to talk about anything going on in the modern day. There's some correspondence. All right, here we go. You ready for the horrible part? Guess how long the average sermon was?
2 hours.
2 hours! Yes, indeed. 2 hours, twice a Sunday. Now I know, if that clock over there on Sunday morning goes past 11:15, we know there are riots, we can't make it to the Mexican restaurant before the Methodists get there. That is hardcore music. I remember one time, my gosh, we have old people, the diabetics are passing out. We cannot go that long. In Puritan times, it's two 2-hour sermons on Sunday. Not just one, but 2 2-hour sermons. Don't worry, it's about to get worse. Because your average sermon was not orated, it was read. It was read. I.e., they look and they just talk like this the entire time. You're not supposed to show too much emotion. You're not really supposed to look at your audience. You just basically read for 2 straight hours. I liken it to lectures. I'm a college professor. I lecture. If I read a lecture that was 2 hours long, I would even fall asleep. And I love hearing myself talk. That's why I got the job in the first place. So yes, it is a 2-hour sermon. The average New Englander hears about 7,000 sermons over the course of their lifetime. 7,000 2-hour sermons most of which are very obtuse and talk about Greek and Latin because, God forbid, you talk about anything going on in the modern day. Next week, when we talk about the Great Awakening, you're going to see why it was such a revelation. Because they changed the nature of the sermons. They changed the nature of the sermons. They are no longer 2 hours long. Some of them are actually orated. You actually have some theatrics going on. And so now we get to the fun part. Who's ready for the fun part? Everybody say fun part.
Fun part.
Baptist! Hey! You're like, oh, thank God, Tully. You forgot this is a Baptist church. You're talking about these Anglicans and these Puritans. And what about us? What about us tambourine-shaking Baptists? All right, let's go with some Baptist history. So ironically, most of the people who dissent to the Puritans, because not everybody likes the Puritans, they actually say the Puritans are not going far enough. They're like, oh, no, y'all are being too lax. You're being too liberal in your laws of your 2-hour sermons and mandating everybody knows how to read. We need more strict interpretation, more strict implementation of biblical stuff. Most of them get shunted off to one colony. Anybody know the one colony that later becomes a state that is known as the home for all the religious whack jobs? Rhode Island. Rhode Island was founded by a religious dissenter, and basically for the longest time was where all the religious centers got put together. Basically, if you didn't like the Puritans, you ended up in Rhode Island. And basically the Puritans thought that's where the weirdos are. That's where they put the weirdos, all in Rhode Island.
Still weird.
Yeah, it's still weird, yeah. Others get uneasy acceptance in places like Massachusetts, Connecticut, not really. But the thing I want you to think about, religious plurality kind of becomes the norm in America. Okay, the idea that, hey, you're going to have a lot of different religions, and you know what? The town is big enough that you can just go, like, a couple streets over and have your own church is very American. I want you to think for a second. Anybody know about how big Albany is, population-wise? 1,200. I like that number. I was going to say 1,000, but you know what? Let's give it back to you. 1,200 people. Okay, cool. I want you to imagine a town of 1,200 in Europe, right? Maybe France or Germany or England or something like that. How many churches is that town going to have? 1. It's going to have been there for several hundred years, and if they have 2 churches, by God, they were fighting at some point in the past. Like, honest to God, wolves. How many churches do we have in Albany? Too many! Seriously, 4? No, there are more than 4. Like, I was thinking, I'm not even exaggerating, from my house, which is only 4 minutes away, to here, there are 2 different churches before we get to Bethlehem. And there's a third that shut down because of the flood. There is at least 4 different Baptist churches in Albany alone. Not to mention non-denominational, Pentecostal, Catholics are over there, the Hungarian Hungarian Presbyterians are out there. Do you see how the idea, like, hey, in a town of 1,200, we got at least a dozen churches? At least a dozen churches. Where anywhere else in the world, there'd have been 1. And you just deal with that. That's something very ingrained in America. To see that, hey, we're big enough, you can do your own thing. If you don't like it, just go a couple towns over, go a couple streets over, make your own church. We'll kind of live and let live with you. Does that kind of make sense? So the Baptists are probably the kings of this group. The Baptists are part of the kings of this group. They show up in Massachusetts shortly after its founding. Shortly after its founding, the Baptists come to Massachusetts. And how do you think those Massachusetts felt about the Baptists? They didn't like him at all. To be fair, nobody liked the Baptists. Nobody liked the Baptists in this time period. Now, the Baptists actually come from England. It's very complicated. They don't call themselves Baptists in this time period, but I'm going to call them Baptists because they get the name later. We're going to get into it. Just call them Baptists, all right? Just call them Baptists. They believe that the Church of England needs to be completely tossed out. Like, you know how they're saying the early Puritans like, oh, maybe we can make it less Catholic? The Baptists are like, it's all awful, just get rid of it. Make a new church entirely. We're not going to try to reform. It is too badly tainted. How do you think the English government feels about a group of people saying, hey, the church of this country is too badly tainted, throw it out? They're not happy. And very quickly they get persecution by the English government. And a group fled by a man, and I don't have his name up here, I probably should, because get ready for a confusing name. His name is John Smith. With a Y, S-M-Y-T-H. So he's different than the Pocahontas guy, but his name is John Smith. John Smith leads a group of these early Baptists to the Netherlands. They go to Holland, which is known for being very religiously free and independent, and everybody likes everybody. It's a lot of tolerance going on there. They get in contact with the Dutch Mennonites. The Dutch Mennonites. Maybe y'all heard the term before. Mennonite? You've definitely heard of the Amish. These are the predecessors to the Amish. They are technically part of the first Anabaptists. All right, here's where we get complicated. The group before they went to England was known as something different. John Smith kind of changed their name to the Baptists because of the Anabaptists. Because of the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists come from like Germany and the Netherlands. So that's, the name Baptist comes from Anabaptist. The name Anabaptist means rebaptism. The radical belief that Anabaptists believe is that people need to be baptized as an adult. They believe that people need to be baptized as an adult. Not just that, they need to be rebaptized as an adult. So you get baptized once when you're a baby, and later on you get baptized later in life. Still a very common belief in Baptist churches, yes, that, we generally baptize adults. Yes, okay. That thing right there, the baptism, do we put babies in there too often? Not really, we never do that. They believe basically, hey, if you look at the Bible, anytime they talk about baptism, the Bible's usually an adult getting it. Jesus gets baptized as an adult. John the Baptist is baptizing adults. The Ethiopian eunuch who meets with Philip in the book of Acts gets baptized as an adult. They don't talk much about infant baptism in the Bible. They don't really talk about it at all, frankly. So like, hey, we should probably get baptized as an adult, because what's the good of baptizing a baby? They don't know what's going on. You should wait to get baptized when you understand what you're doing. It shows a deeper commitment to God. Is that still kind of belief in Baptist circles? This is a very big, yes, it is, yes, indeed. Absolutely. So, some of John Smith's followers, they like the Mennonites, they want to go deeper with them. Others want to load back from England because they think Holland is a little too accepting. They're like, oh, they like us, but we don't like how we have to accept everybody else. They're like, we want to practice our own religion, thank you very much, but not your religion, even though we're supposed to live and let live. And so basically, Smith returns to England and establishes the first Baptist churches in England. He establishes the first Baptist churches in England, and they are called Baptist. Now they have some very radical beliefs. They have some very radical beliefs for the time period, and when I talk about them, they're not going to seem very radical, they're going to seem very boring. But these are very radical for the time period, even in New England, where the Puritans were doing their own radical stuff too. Big one, local churches should be autonomous. That is a big Baptist belief. They believe local churches should mind their own business. Not just like, don't mess around with us, but basically, okay, some of y'all are like higher up in the different committees here. Is there an overarching Baptist organization that we answer to here at Bethlehem? No. Not really, no. The church does its own affairs. The church decides who they want to become a preacher. They decide their own finances. That's not the case in a lot of other denominations. I was raised Methodist. In Methodist churches, we have the bishop. The bishop basically assigns pastors. You might have a circuit rider come in. Every June they have conference. They bring out pastors, put in pastors. Some of y'all might have a Catholic family. Maybe y'all raised Catholic. Y'all know there's definitely a hierarchy there. It goes right to the bishop, to the cardinal, to the pope, and all the way down. A Baptist church says basically say the local church should be in and of itself. They answer to nobody. They can enter into voluntary associations such as the Southern Baptist Convention, which we'll talk about in a future week, but that's a voluntary association. The Southern Baptist Convention has no power over this church. It's just basically, we align with it, but if Bethlehem Baptist really wants to do something, I don't know what we want to do, but if we want to do something wacky, that the Southern Baptist Convention would not like, we can do it. There's nothing against it. All Baptist associations are voluntary. There's no liturgical power there. They also believe in separation of church and state. They say the state should have no control over the church. Because the church needs to be autonomous, there is no governance of the church, including the state. They say magistrates, mind their own business. Do your judge stuff, we'll do our church stuff. Believe that church is a voluntary association. They said basically, if you're mandating church service, is it really worth anything? If you're mandating people go to church, are they really believing anything? Or are they just doing it because they want the benefits of citizenship and being able to vote and all that other stuff? They said basically, keep it religious. Keep it religious. In addition, the other radical thing, baptism is only for adults. Like I talked about before, baptism is only for adults. Early on, they are rebaptizing, but pretty quickly they're like, you know what? Let's not baptize children. We'll dedicate them if the parent really wants it. But otherwise, we will not baptize a child. Now, I know I call them radical, but does that seem pretty ordinary Baptist? Still to this day, it is very ordinary Baptist. So I just told you that because the early uniqueness of baptism, Baptists, is around even before they come to America. This is before they come to America. They already have these beliefs. Now, there is a division, though, between general and practical Baptists. Particular Baptists. Get used to this one. We're talking about this quite a bit. The difference between predestination and, Calvinism and Arminianism. Predestination versus the individual chooses salvation. Make sense? Predestination says God chooses your salvation. Arminianism, or free will, says basically you choose your salvation.
What is that word you're saying?
Not Armenian, not the country. Arminianism is the technical term. However, we just go with free will. I like to call it religious free agency. Religious free agency. You decide what team you're going to play for. The predestination believes God decided, like eons ago, before the world was created, he decided what souls are going to heaven and what souls are going to hell, and you can't do anything else about it. Free will says basically, no, you pray a prayer, that sort of thing. Nowadays in America, most Baptist churches are more free will. Not all of them, though, because if anybody goes to New Orleans Theological Baptist Seminary, there's a growing group of Calvinists there. There's definitely a growing group of Calvinists at the church, at the seminary, absolutely. By the time we get to 1660, there are more than 300 Baptist churches in England. None in America. The first Baptist church, though, in America is in 1639, and where else? Rhode Island. Where all the whack jobs end up. They go there. The guy who helps establish it is a man by the name of Roger Williams, who's very, very influential in terms of just early religious dissent in America. I don't have enough time to talk about him, but he's very important. For the sake of us, though, he leaves that Baptist church within a few months. He's like, no church has it right with God. He's like, he even says, like, I don't really respect you, Baptist, but I will help you form a church so you can practice here in Rhode Island because we're the colony for all the nut jobs. But I don't believe in what you believe. But he's like a very important dissenter. He's very important in getting him money and basically a building, for lack of another term. But he leaves very quickly. He leaves very quickly, saying basically, y'all ain't got it right. To be fair, he doesn't like anybody. He doesn't like anybody. He's like, nope, y'all got it wrong.
Where'd he go?
He was still in Rhode Island. He just went to his other church. He was just kind of dissenting all over. He was just kind of making the rounds. So like he established the church. He's like, cool, y'all are running? All right, see y'all. It's like, what's that old phrase? I don't believe in what you say, but I'll believe to the death you're right to say it, kind of thing, where he's like, yeah, I don't believe in your religious beliefs, but by God, you should be able to practice them. So once they're started, he's like, I'm out, peace. I don't like y'all. To be fair, the Baptists are very highly persecuted by the Puritan government, a lot. Why are they persecuting them? Because they don't like the idea of a division of church and state. That is something key to the Puritan mindset, is basically there is no division of church and state. The Baptists say, no, we need a division of church and state. Ironically, this is what America has in terms of the separation of church and state, comes from Baptist thinkers. Which we'll talk, I'm probably not going to talk about this in the series, but talking about the revolution sometimes, there's a lot of different thoughts going on there. All right, so what is the crime what is the punishment for promoting Baptist views? I'll tell you right there, it was a crime. To promote Baptist views in a lot of Puritan colonies was a crime. Guess what the punishment was?
Execution.
Wow, no. Oh my gosh, wow. We would not be here. Wow, no. Just a public whipping. If you're promoting Baptist views, you would be whipped in public. You would get shamed and you would get caned. You basically get whipped for promoting Baptist views because, once again, they don't like the idea of promoting a division of church and state. Ironically, that's what got them kicked out of England, was promoting a division between church and state. So, ironic. Despite being very small in number, the Puritans do see the Baptists as a threat. They see the Baptists as a threat mainly for subverting the church and state. Likewise, they never liked Roger Williams. The Puritans never liked Roger Williams, so they're like, that guy founded it? Ugh. Even though he left very quickly, they're like, we don't care for him whatsoever. So aside from the dissenters, though, the main opponent of Puritanism, I'm going to end up here, is time itself. In time, less people become Baptists. Less people want to become members of the church because they're like, hey, we don't want to follow all these rules. As the colonies get more successful, you have more people coming to the colonies, we don't really want to follow the rules, and so the churches kind of wane in influence. It kind of puts the church in a kind of delicate position because, like, they want to keep the church pure. You know, they don't want to compromise their beliefs, but they also want to have influence over the colony. They want to have influence over the colony, so they come up with something called halfway membership. Halfway membership. Where basically, you can be baptized as a baby, and that's about it. You get baptized, and you're expected to, like, have some of the rights of citizenship, but you're not expected to, like, pay your pew rental fee, or, like, come to church. Oh, they took attendance at church, too. Which, once again, some of you church people are like, that's a great idea. If you were not at church for anything other than sickness or harvest, you could be penalized. and again, the church people are like, that's not a terrible idea. I don't like that. A bigger detriment, though, is various military conflicts. Basically, they start fighting with the Native Americans more. This costs money. If you ever take my class, you're going to hear me say the phrase, wars cost money, 1,000,000 times. King Philip's War in particular was a very, very expensive war for the early English. Basically, because these wars cost money, because the Puritans are getting into conflict with the Native Americans and the crown is being called in to save them, the crown is taking more direct control. Like, hey, basically, we're going to stop you from doing everything you want because when you do what you want, we get involved in wars. So we're not stopping that. In 1685, King James II, who's actually a Catholic, was part of the charter with the Puritans, and puts the Puritan colonies under the direct control of the new Dominion of New England, along with New Jersey and New York, which are colonies. So basically, they're now secular. James II does this to kind of undermine the Protestant groups because he's Catholic. Even once he's removed from the throne, they keep up this secular government. So ironically, religious control over America in the New England colonies ends in 1685. In 1685, there's a new secular government, mainly because they didn't like the Puritans not being extensive. They liked them better when they were just like kind of doing their own thing and they're getting money and not spending money. So because they have new leadership, what happens to the churches? They really wane in influence. They wane in influence even more. Even a halfway membership doesn't help them out very much. The leadership of the churches feels like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. We are falling apart here. Or we don't have the influence we once did. And this is where we get to something very appropriate for October: the Salem witch trials. Here we go. The Salem witch trials, which you probably know about. The Salem witch trials. The thing you need to realize about them: this is happening when the Puritans have already been kicked out of the government. The Puritans are not in control of any of these colonies. They still have some old judgeships in there. The magistrates might still be in line with the churches. But like if you think about the Crucible or something, that is now under the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is now has secular governance. And it's only been in secular governance for about 7 years. You could say that, ironically, there have been witch trials before in America. The Salem witch trials are actually not even that violent in terms of witch trials. Way less people are killed in that one as opposed to some of the ones that are going on in England in this time period. But the sense of urgency really comes from the fact that the Puritan government has lost control of the government. It's basically the Puritans have lost control of the government, and they're like, oh my gosh, we need to retain the power somehow. So they kind of jump upon, oh my gosh, do we have satanic attack? I need you to understand, everybody back then believed in demons. They don't understand germs. So think about it. All right, hey, imagine if you're like goody whatever. I'm like, hey, your cow died. There were some teeny tiny microbes, okay? Really? And they got in that big cow's head, and killed it, and they died of dry rot. Is that more believable than a demon did it? Why'd your baby die? Oh, well, there was some infant died. A demon did it. The demons are in the Bible, not teeny tiny germs. So do you see, everybody believes this back then. Do not think these are a bunch of religious nut jobs who are going, blah. It's more to do with political power. All right, so a little bit of conclusion because we're out of time. Number one, the big one, profits and profits. There's always a line where basically the English crown is like, hey, as long as they're making money, we'll let these nut jobs do what they want. Once they're no longer making money and spending money, okay, we're going to get control. Likewise, the leadership of these colonies, some of them are like, oh yeah, let's raise some money and then also save people. But that tension is always there. The tension which are basically, are we trying to make some money or are we trying to be good for God? The Aaron itself has become a lifeline. There are more people involved in this Aaron in the wilderness. The Aaron means it's just very short. Now it's for a long time. Another thing that really, really influences everything is the lowered mortality. More people are surviving. If more people are surviving, there's less emphasis upon being super religious. Does that make sense? If you're not prone to just die for any random reason, if the fact that the mortality rates, which were 5 or 6 times higher in America than they were in England, kind of level off in about 100 years, by the time we get to the beginning of the 1700s, there's less emphasis upon, okay, we're all dying. So we're dying at the same rate as everybody else. So that also limits emphasis on it. However, I hope you do understand this is one of the big bases for later America. Hopefully you've seen already some of the roots that you've already seen here, particularly with the Baptist faith. Not just within the Baptist church we're in now, but all of America. Things like separation of church and state, individual piety, the idea that majority rule kind of gets aligned with democracy and that. So that about does it. Next time, things get crazy. The first Great Awakening. The first Great Awakening is going to happen where we get our first hellfire and brimstone sermon. So, well, we're ready for that one, yes. How do we go from 2-hour-long sermons twice a day to what we have nowadays? Well, we'll talk about it next time. Thank y'all so much. Hopefully y'all enjoyed it. Do you have any questions or anything? I'm sorry I talked too much. Anybody have general questions? I guess we weren't predestined to have questions.
There you go.
Oh! Tell us some jokes. All right, thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
No problem. Yes, I was not going to keep y'all for 2 hours, twice on Sunday. I should have. That would have been my right.
At least the first one.
Let's keep it historically accurate.
We'll keep it up. It'll still be the Baptist.